story. So, for example, you asked me about the literary quality of stories from the Old Testament last time. Remember, we were talking about was it all blood and guts? And so there was one story I thought that I love in particular that I thought I might raise and just, I think actually, in fact, you would actually like this story quite a bit. And the story I would choose is actually the book of Job. So if you'll bear with me for a moment, I want to explain to you why I think you would love the book of Job, and it actually speaks directly to your sensibilities. So the book of Job actually has two parts. There's the beginning when Satan says to God, "Hey, look at your follower there, Job. He's such a good guy. Let's put him to the test." Right?
And these two actors are equally evil. The person who offered the bet and the person who accepted the bet, they're equally evil. But let's go on.
Right, so let's go on. So the point of actually of looking at Job is actually scholars like Stephen Mitchell have pointed out that there's two stories there. There's that stuff that gets wrapped around, like many things in any of these spiritual scriptures, whether they're Christian or Islamic or Hindu. You'll find they were written at different times. The really beautiful poetry of Job comes when Job starts to having all this horrible stuff happens to Job, right? He gets the boils, he loses his family, he loses his crops, and his friends come and say, "Oh, Job, you should curse. How can you? What did you do wrong?"
And Job, of course, is a metaphor for all of us as we suffer through the sheer pointless randomness inflicted on us by reality.
Exactly, and then at the end, right? What happens is finally Job says, "All right, enough. God, what did I do?" He rails against God, right? And then, God appears in the whirlwind or appears to him, and these beautiful lines where God says, "Hey, where were you? Where were you when I laid down the foundation of the world? Where were you when I taught the antelope to calf and knew when her time was ready?" I mean, those lines are so beautiful and evocative. And really, as with any of these documents, one is free to interpret them. And one, as you say, one of the beautiful things about this story is about suffering in the face of no meaning, is suffering without explanations. And at the end, right after, God goes through all of this and explains to, Job, or not explains to Job, points out
Bullies
to Job
him.
that
the word
he
you're
was
looking for is bully.
Well, again, but no, wait a minute.
The universe is created so I get to give you boils? What? If this were not religious scripture, if this were some kind of movie on TV that we were deconstructing
Hold it, Elijah, let me
for
finish.
the
Let me
TV
finish.
tropes
Let me come
wiki.
to the Elijah, let me come to the conclusion
Sure,
and the different ways one can interpret it, right? Now, at the end, after God sort of points out to Job that the universe is structured the way the universe is structured, Job is silent. That's all Job can be, is silent. And
No,
this
Job
metaphor,
has a lot to say
wait,
besides silence,
Elijah, let me
but
finish.
go on.
Elijah, let me finish. I have to come to the end. Now,
Okay.
this can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. Many people find a great beauty in this story because it is exactly that sense of there is suffering and there is travail, and in some sense we are part of the universe and we're stuck with it. But even for you, as a hardcore reductionist, there's a way of interpreting it, which actually Ursula Goodenough, who's a biologist who wrote the Sacred Depths of Nature, you can interpret it scientifically, which is this. This is the world you get. Maybe it's made of just little atoms, and that's it. Deal with it. This is the world you are born into. You can rail against it, but as Feynman says, you don't like this universe? Go find another. So there is great wisdom in that story, as a human story, expressing countless generations of human beings facing suffering, facing just the presence in the world with all of its travails, and how to come to terms with it when there is no hand to hold. So, again, that story, and the poetry in that story is truly beautiful, which is why so many people of all different approaches to religion, even people like myself who are not religious, still find beauty in its poetry.
Tolkien's got beautiful poetry. And Tolkien, if you read him carefully, has some unfortunate assumptions built into his world. The orcs are always lawful evil, or always chaotic evil. I forget what the expression is. But, there's these little brutish creatures running around. It's always okay to kill them, because they're always the bad guys. And Aragorn, he's not democratically elected. He's just the heir, so he gets to be king. Things like that. And if you look at the assumptions of Job, it's immensely worse, of course. You've got this God decides to ruin this guy's life, killing off dozens of innocent bystanders on a bet. And then, when Job has the temerity to complain about this, bullies him into silence by saying, I'm bigger and more powerful and knowledgeable than you. Shut up. This is an unabashedly dreadful story. And the fact that it's written in wonderful poetry doesn't excuse that any more than if Das Kapital had been written in wonderful poetry. You know, the problems with Tolkien's moral assumptions cannot be excused by the beauty of Tolkien's poetry. And the people who analyze Tolkien, you know, understand this. But the people who analyze Job, because it's a religious book, because so many other people think that it was written by God, even though they themselves don't written by God, they give it a pass. They refuse to apply their own moral faculties. Their morality analysis off switch has been flipped. This is the very danger of religion.
ELIEZER, you're choosing one interpretation, and you're ignoring all the other interpretations of the book of Job that people, again, who are non-religious, who have no belief in God, still find the beauty in that story, the wisdom in that story, which is, in some sense, thy will, not mine, whether thy will is just the, meaningless universe of atoms. You're saying that interpretation cannot be chosen. That wisdom you wouldn't.
I would not choose that interpretation.
You wouldn't choose, but many other people do and have found their wisdom in it. And that's the point I'm saying. First of all, you're saying there was nothing...
No. What I'm trying to say here is not that I wouldn't choose that interpretation of Job. I'm saying even if you offer me that interpretation of Job, I still reject the content of it. Because there is no God, because there is no one here but us, we are not helpless victims being told by some higher power to shut up. We can change the world. We can cure smallpox. You don't see many people walking around with, suffering from horrible boils anymore, and that's because we have medicine, and the reason we have medicine is that the boils are not part of a divine plan. They are not laid down by some higher power since the creation of the universe. They are pointless randomness, and when we came into our power of technology, we cured it, and there was no higher power to stop us or even rebuke us for its being unwise. And again, the wisdom of the story is no greater than the wisdom and the poetry of Tolkien. I can challenge it as an equal. I am not on my knees before it in helpless reverence. I can write better stories myself.
ELIEZER. Anybody who has stood before or sat by the bedside of their child, hoping that the drugs that have been administered will work, when sometimes they don't, has understood the moment of coming against the world. God, not God, that's a choice, but coming against the world and its uncertainty. And that is, the poetry of that story is what expresses it brings meaning to them. Because whether or not they choose to have a belief in a God or not have a belief in a God, what that story illustrates is our place against the world. And that's why people find meaning. Now, you may not choose it, because one of the question we're asking here is not your reaction to the story, but, people's reaction to the story over history and why those stories endure. And the reason, and why you may want to throw everything out and start over again. But in these stories, people have found great meaning and comfort because on one level at least they express profoundly human truths. They don't have to be attached to, and this is what I mean when I think about thoughtful, a thoughtful believer. They don't have to be attached to an Old Testament vision of a God. So that's why these stories, that's why throwing it out and starting over again is, in some sense, it's an illusion, because how will you make that happen? Are you going to re-educate everyone? Are you going to, stand out in the street and argue for an atheist vision? I mean, doesn't atheism then just become another Protestant form, a missionary form, trying to convince people that its interpretations are better?